Welcome to the inner circle. Take a breath and notice the sudden stillness around you. That isn't an accident, and it isn't peaceful. That is the exact frequency people emit when they realize the steering wheel just snapped off in their hands and they are no longer driving the outcome. Let's drop the polite act. The rumors said you were done. They claimed you stepped over the line, forgot your rank, and played your last card. But look at the room now. The very critics who demanded an apology are suddenly checking the exits. Reality is a harsh teacher, and class is officially in session. It is fascinating how vocal they were when they assumed you were isolated, and how instantly mute they became the second you stopped asking them for permission to exist. Here is the concrete truth they are trying to outrun. Every barrier they built has already crumbled. Every path they tried to block has already been walked. Every piece of slander they launched to poison your name simply drifted back and exposed the decay in their own camp. They didn't break because you launched an attack. They broke because you remained entirely still. That is the exact reality eating away at their confidence. You felt the atmosphere shift before a single word was uttered, the nervous clearing of throats, the sudden lack of eye contact, the over-the-top praise that feels less like a compliment and more like damage control. The loud voices have dropped an octave. They are moving very carefully now, terrified of triggering the avalanche they accidentally started. This isn't an illusion. This is the aftermath. They assumed friction would shatter you. Instead, it forged you. They thought starvation would deplete you. Instead, it refined you. And now you are standing here, composed, unreadable, entirely devoid of a need for a victory lap or a revenge tour. Your sheer presence is the threat. You didn't need to announce the shift. The results did it for you. Behind closed doors, the tone has fundamentally inverted. The mockery is gone, replaced by frantic strategy sessions disguised as concern. Someone finally stated the obvious. We need to intervene before this goes any further. Make no mistake, they don't care about your well-being. They are terrified of what happens if your momentum continues unhindered. So, they selected their best diplomat. The one with the credentials, the influence, the one who used to confidently dictate your limitations to the group. He approached you with that beautifully rehearsed tone, half empathy, half authority, the classic routine that says, I'm looking out for you, while subtly trying to cut your speed. But they misread the landscape. When they pleaded with him to step in, when they begged him to intercept you before the final line was crossed, he didn't argue. He didn't even hesitate. He simply smiled. Not a warm smile, not a reassuring one. It was the specific smile of someone who has already reviewed the final metrics and knows there is no rewrite coming. When they desperately asked if he could halt the execution of what was coming, he gave them a two-word answer that completely drained the energy from the room. Too late. Before we unpack the full sequence, look at the reality of this moment. Interact with this message, not for the algorithm, but for the clarity of the objective. This transmission only cuts deeper when you actively validate its frequency. Now, let's analyze why those two words hit them like a physical blow. Because they understand history. They have watched this cycle play out in corporate structures, broken families, decaying industries, and cultural shifts. The quiet individual who took the pressure, analyzed the mechanics of the system, and exited the arena without begging for validation is always the one who reshapes the landscape. They overlooked you because arrogance breeds absolute blindness. Think about every historical pivot point where someone laughed right before losing their entire position. The legacy empire, that dismissed the quiet competitor they couldn't comprehend. The social circle that exiled a member, only to watch that member build a completely superior reality without them. The old guard who ignored a name until that exact name was written on the lease of the building. The script always finishes the same way. The adversary overplays their hand. The individual underreacts. Then reality closes the ledger. What you are experiencing right now isn't resentment, it is closure. That is precisely why you are dangerous. Resentment is chaotic and loud. Closure is surgical and efficient. You have zero need for active retaliation because the math of the universe has already settled the account. Every hostile action they took simply stacked the ultimate probability against them. And now the invoice has arrived. They are begging for warnings because a warning implies they still have a vote. If they can say, "We tried to reason with them," they can clear their conscience. But the truth is stark. You simply outgrew the sandbox where their opinions carried weight. The storm didn't destroy you. It passed through you. What they are left navigating now is the dead air left in its wake, the phase where the structural damage becomes undeniable, and there is no scapegoat left to blame. You aren't pursuing them. You aren't proving a point. You are just operating in your zone while they search for explanations. That is the outcome they never factored into their equations. That is why the diplomat's smile unnerved them. He recognized what they actively chose to ignore. This wasn't a sudden stroke of luck. This was earned over time. The world no longer addresses you the same way. Not because you demanded a title, but because your reality became undeniable. Too late isn't an insult, it is a final judgment. Let's pause exactly here. This is the precise threshold where the purely curious listeners quietly switch off, and the individuals this briefing was actually constructed for lean in. Because from this point forward, we are dropping the introductory context. What follows is the exact breakdown they were begging the diplomat to prevent you from discovering. The sequence, the phases, and the precise reasons why their panic peaked, why warnings suddenly became their only currency, and why he knew interference was completely impossible. Listen intentionally. If you felt a distinct pull to stay, if something in your core anchored when you heard those words, this isn't entertainment. It is confirmation. The universe does not direct specific insights toward people who lack the capacity to execute them. Mark your alignment in the comments if you are here intentionally, not for a trend, but as a deliberate signal that you are locked in, balanced, and prepared to watch the entire architecture unfold without flinching. This next sequence isn't theatrical, it is precise, layer by layer. If this is your lane, you won't even think about looking away. You will feel that steady focus compelling you to finish the assessment, because stepping away now leaves the equation incomplete. Excellent. Let's break down the mechanics. Warnings are designed for entities that still possess tactical choices. They no longer do. That specific smile wasn't hostile, nor was it smug. It was definitive. It's the look exchanged when a contract is already terminated, but the other party is still reading the old clauses. He didn't lower his tone, offer an apology, or try to sound profound. He smiled the way an auditor does when the spreadsheet has already balanced, been verified, and been locked by the system. Too late wasn't a boast, it was a mathematical status report. People consistently misread these dynamics because they expect power to be loud. They anticipate theatrical confrontations, shouting matches, and dramatic ultimatums. But authentic authority is quiet because it doesn't require a consensus to function. That is exactly why that quiet smile dismantled their confidence faster than an open insult. It validated their deepest fear. You were officially out of range. They honestly believed a targeted warning would break your stride. They thought a sit-down meeting would reset the pieces on the board. They assumed there was still a lever to pull, a pressure point to exploit, or a history string they could tug. That assumption alone betrays their desperation. People only attempt to warn those they still have the leverage to govern. But leverage exited the equation months ago. You didn't step across the boundary in a single explosive moment. You did it incrementally, one deliberate choice at a time, one boundary maintained, one emotional reaction withheld, one instance where you prioritized execution over drama. That is the blind spot they suffered from. While they were waiting for an explosion, you were systematically becoming bulletproof. You didn't become a threat by launching an offensive. You became a threat by completing your internal rewiring without requesting their feedback. That is why the warning arrived long after the fact. The universe rarely broadcasts its turning points. It simply lets people discover them when it is entirely inconvenient to adapt. Analyze what too late actually meant in that context. It wasn't a measure of hours, it was a measure of access. They were locked out. No more administrative control, no more leverage, no more capacity to edit your narrative. The version of you they possessed data on no longer existed, and the current version didn't require their comprehension to operate. The diplomat could see it clearly. He knew that whatever trend they were trying to mitigate had already matured. You weren't transitioning, you were finished. The old guard despises this phase because it gives them absolutely nothing to fight. There is no debate to win, no emotional vulnerability to exploit, no chaos to leverage, just silence, forward motion, and total execution. That is when the internal spiral begins. That is when they start replaying old interactions, trying to pinpoint the exact moment they lost their grip on your trajectory. Let's answer the unspoken question currently resting in your mind. No, you didn't miss a step. No, you didn't overplay your position. And no, you owe absolutely zero explanations to anyone for evolving past the version of you that was highly convenient for them to manage. The exact second they dispatched a messenger to check your temperature was the exact second they admitted the match was decided. Organizations don't send emissaries when they are controlling the field. They send them when they are scrambling from behind. That smile was pure realism, it stated. The individual you are attempting to address is no longer in the building. It stated, the outcome you are trying to prevent is already ancient history. They wanted to see hesitation. They wanted you to look conflicted. Instead, they encountered total internal integration. And absolute integration terrifies people who survive on external control. Here is the raw reality. You became unmanageable the exact second you stopped needing them to acknowledge your value. The moment you stopped explaining your roadmap, the moment you let your execution do the talking. You didn't win by out-arguing them in public. You won by outgrowing them in the dark. While they were managing appearances, you were reinforcing your foundations. While they were drafting responses, you were removing their emotional access entirely. Now they are left analyzing the debris, wondering how an upgrade occurred so quietly. This is where chosen individuals often stumble. This is where old programming attempts one final intervention. You might think, should I downshift? Should I soften my stance? Should I hear out their perspective? That question alone illustrates how far you've come, because the previous version of you would have already compromised. The current version simply notes the thought and continues moving forward. Understand this structural rule. The universe doesn't send warnings when it wants you to abort the mission. It sends confirmations when it demands that you accelerate. That smile was validation, not for their benefit, but for yours. It was the definitive proof that you are no longer compatible with manipulation, guilt, or regression. The door they assumed was still slightly open was already locked, deadbolted, and erased from your map. You didn't execute this process to damage anyone. You did it to survive, to scale, to become precise instead of hyper-reactive, powerful instead of noisy. They are scrambling for a dialogue now because they waited too long to respect your trajectory. They misread patience for weakness, silence for confusion, and tolerance for compliance. By the time they realized the scale of the upgrade, the paradigm had already shifted past their input. He didn't say, "too late" with sorrow. He said it like an anchor dropping at the end of an era. And you are standing firmly on the new shoreline.